Isabella's heart moved quietly through the grand halls of the Drake mansion, her hand instinctively resting on the swell of her 8 months pregnant belly. The house gleamed with opulence, marble floors that reflected the afternoon sun, crystal chandeliers that sparkled like captured stars, and walls adorned with modern art that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Outsiders would have envied her life, imagining it to be perfect, a fairy tale of wealth, love, and social prestige. Lavish parties, meticulously curated social media posts, and endless compliments from friends and followers painted a picture of happiness. Yet behind the glittering veneer, cracks had begun to appear, subtle at first, but growing wider with every passing day. Isabella sensed the shift in Raphael Drake, her husband, a man whose public charm and calculated smiles masked a controlling streak and a relentless obsession with appearances. Raphael's obsession with validation had always been a part of his personality, but lately it had grown into a consuming force that Isabella could not ignore. He seemed distant, even when physically present, more interested in how he appeared in front of cameras and social media than in the well-being of his wife or the child she carried. Dinners were cancelled without explanation, messages slipped through without response, and conversations ended abruptly with irritation. The warmth that had once defined their relationship had cooled into detachment, and Isabella felt a quiet loneliness even within the walls of the mansion she called home. Despite the warning signs, Isabella clung to hope, believing in the love that had once seemed unbreakable. She tried to convince herself that Raphael's behavior was temporary, that the pressures of his work and public life had distracted him, and that behind the arrogance and coldness still lay the man she had married. What she did not realize, however, was that Raphael's attention was slowly shifting elsewhere, toward another woman who promised admiration, excitement, and the validation he craved more than the comfort of his own family. Each passing day, Isabella's world, once secure and warm, was quietly being eroded by a husband she no longer fully knew, leaving her vulnerable to betrayal she could never have anticipated. Selina Vale had a presence that demanded attention, one that seemed to fill any room, or screen, she occupied. She thrived on admiration, drama, and the intoxicating rush of influence, and when she set her sights on Raphael Drake, it was clear she intended to claim him entirely. Her approach was subtle at first, carefully crafted compliments, playful messages under his social media posts, and an exaggerated admiration that stroked Raphael's already fragile ego. "No one carries themselves like you," she would write. "Imagine the empires we could build together." Every word was designed to entice, to feed his obsession with validation, and Raphael, starved for constant affirmation, responded eagerly. Their interactions quickly evolved beyond online exchanges. Secret meetings were arranged under the pretense of business discussions, but each encounter carried an undeniable intimacy. Selina knew precisely how to manipulate his desires, offering praise where Isabella's love had become taken for granted and filling the spaces Raphael had neglected with attention, excitement, and flattery. The more time he spent with Selina, the more distant he became from Isabella, his once considerate glances replaced with distracted stares at his phone, and his laughter now reserved for someone else. Selina's influence grew bolder with every encounter. She encouraged Raphael to flaunt power, dismiss his pregnant wife, and assert himself in ways that publicly reinforced his superiority. Their secret meetings began to spill into public spaces, carefully orchestrated moments designed to hint at their growing bond while maintaining the appearance of coincidence. Digital flirtation, shared stories, and cryptic posts amplified their connection, leaving breadcrumbs that Isabella could feel but not yet identify. At home, Isabella began to sense the presence of another woman lurking behind Raphael's increasing distance. Small details, a whispered laugh during a phone call, a quickly minimized message, the faint scent of perfume that was not hers, pricked at her instincts. Though she did not yet know the identity of the mistress, she felt the tension mounting, the walls of her carefully constructed life trembling, and a growing dread that the man she loved was slipping further into someone else's world, leaving her increasingly isolated and vulnerable. Isabella could no longer ignore the subtle but unmistakable signs that something had shifted in Raphael's behavior. He had started hiding his phone, slipping it into drawers or taking it with him constantly, as if guarding some secret from her. Certain rooms in the mansion were suddenly off-limits, locked without explanation, and every question she asked about his whereabouts or the reasons for his absences was met with irritation, vague excuses, or outright dismissal. The warmth and comfort that had once defined the Drake mansion had vanished, replaced by a coldness that wrapped itself around her like a suffocating shroud. Even in the late stages of her pregnancy, Isabella found herself shouldering the majority of household duties alone, preparing meals, organizing appointments, and managing the mansion's endless demands. The tasks that once felt manageable now felt overwhelming, made heavier by the emotional burden of Raphael's detachment. Nights stretched long and lonely as he disappeared for hours, sometimes entire evenings, under the pretense of business meetings or social engagements that required his presence elsewhere. Isabella could feel, deep in her heart, that these excuses were carefully constructed lies designed to mask the time he spent with Selena. Attempts to bridge the widening gap between them proved futile. She tried gently to communicate, to express her concerns, to reconnect, but Raphael treated her presence as an inconvenience rather than a partner. Conversations that once nurtured intimacy now ended with sighs, cold shoulders, or abrupt walks out of the room. The mansion itself seemed to echo her isolation, the silence amplifying her fear and anxiety. With every hidden message, locked door, and distant glance, the signs of betrayal weighed increasingly heavily on Isabella. She could sense the storm gathering, the invisible presence of another woman undermining the life she had built. The emotional distance she felt was not merely a symptom of marital tension, it was a harbinger of the public humiliation that awaited her, a tragedy she could see approaching but felt powerless to stop. The evening air was thick with tension as Raphael meticulously prepared for what he called a family gathering, inviting close friends and relatives while secretly ensuring Selena would be present. The mansion, usually a place of comfort and celebration, was now a stage for his performance, every detail carefully orchestrated to assert control and display power. Isabella arrived, expecting a normal social evening, unaware of the cruel spectacle awaiting her. The moment the guests settled, Raphael began to speak, his tone casual but laced with cutting remarks. He openly criticized Isabella, questioning her choices, mocking her pregnancy, and dismissing her feelings as if they were insignificant. Each word cut deeper than the last, leaving Isabella stunned, her heart racing and her mind struggling to process the betrayal in front of everyone she knew. Selena stood nearby, her smirk a silent provocation, fueling Raphael's arrogance and emboldening him to push further. The dynamic between the two of them was unmistakable, a show of dominance that made every humiliation feel intentional and magnified. Guests, unsure how to respond, shifted uncomfortably while some subtly recorded snippets on their phones, the small screens capturing the scene to be shared online later. The presence of witnesses amplified the humiliation, transforming a private attack into a public spectacle. Isabella's cheeks burned with shame, and her body felt heavy with the weight of both betrayal and embarrassment. Despite the shock and heartbreak, a quiet determination simmered within her. She felt trapped, powerless in the moment, yet deep down, she refused to allow Raphael or Selena to break her completely. The night ended with Isabella retreating to a quiet corner, tears threatening to spill, while Raphael reveled in the control and attention. The experience was intense, emotional, and crushing, leaving scars that went beyond the surface. In the midst of this orchestrated torment, Isabella's resilience began to take root, a silent promise to herself that the humiliation would not define her, and that strength could still be found even in the face of such deliberate cruelty. The night of the gathering left Isabella physically and emotionally drained, but the aftermath hit her faster than she could anticipate. Hours after the humiliation, she felt a sharp, sudden pain in her abdomen that stole her breath and doubled her over. Panic surged as she realized her body was reacting violently to the stress she had endured, triggering labor complications that no one could ignore. Her legs gave way beneath her, and she collapsed to the floor, gasping and clutching her swollen belly, tears mingling with fear as the pain intensified. A concerned family member or close friend, who had witnessed her distress from afar, quickly sprang into action, helping her to a waiting car. Every movement caused waves of agony to ripple through her, each contraction a harsh reminder of her vulnerability. As the vehicle sped toward the hospital, Isabella's mind was a storm of fear, pain, and disbelief, the humiliation of the evening blending with the terror of childbirth complications. She trembled with both physical weakness and emotional exhaustion, fighting to stay conscious, praying for the safety of her child, and cursing the cruelty that had brought her to this point. Raphael, meanwhile, remained strikingly indifferent. His focus was on appearances, on the potential damage to his image, and on the fact that anyone might have witnessed her collapse. He hovered near her side, detached and calculating, asking more about how this would look to others than how she was truly feeling. His coldness contrasted sharply with the panic and vulnerability Isabella felt, highlighting the depth of his cruelty. In the tense ride to the hospital, the stakes of her survival and dignity became painfully clear. Every contraction, every jolt of the car, emphasized how much depended on those around her, the friends who rushed to help, the strangers at the hospital, and the care she would receive once she arrived. Raphael's absence of empathy only amplified her isolation, underscoring that the man she had trusted most had become a bystander in the fight for her life and her unborn child's safety. Isabella lay on the hospital bed, the sterile smell of antiseptic mingling with the faint hum of monitors and distant voices. The physical pain of labor and the emotional weight of betrayal pressed heavily upon her, yet for the first time in hours, she felt a small measure of relief in the presence of the medical staff surrounding her. Nurses moved with quiet efficiency, offering gentle words and reassuring touches, while doctors monitored her condition with professional calm. Their care was steady, compassionate, and genuine, a stark contrast to the callousness she had endured at home. As the pain of her contractions ebbed and flowed, Isabella's mind drifted through memories of Raphael, of the years she had devoted to him, trusting in a love that now felt fragile and deceptive. She replayed the public humiliation, the private betrayals, and the small, nagging signs she had ignored, each one a thread unraveling the illusion she had once believed in. Yet amidst the hurt and heartbreak, she began to recognize a strange clarity. Strength could be drawn from those who showed empathy, from the strangers whose concern was untainted by ego or self-interest. These acts of kindness illuminated the difference between genuine care and the hollow admiration Raphael craved. Meanwhile, Raphael's frustration became increasingly apparent. His obsession with control, with public perception, was beginning to crack under the weight of social backlash. Isabella noticed his tight jaw, the restless pacing, and the futile attempts to assert authority even in a space where he held no real power. Her own calm, measured composure in the hospital contrasted sharply with his panic, foreshadowing a reversal of roles, one she silently welcomed. In these quiet moments, Isabella also began to contemplate the bold words she would speak to Raphael later, words that would assert her independence and expose his cruelty. Each reflection, each breath amidst the pain, strengthened her resolve, preparing her for the pivotal confrontation that would change everything and redefine the balance of power between them. The final hours of labor were grueling, each contraction testing Isabella's physical endurance and emotional resolve. Yet through the pain, a steady presence surrounded her, nurses with calm hands and encouraging words, doctors who guided her through each stage, and friends who had rushed to her side offering comfort and reassurance. When the moment finally arrived, and her child was delivered safely into her arms, a wave of relief and triumph washed over her. The baby's cry, clear and strong, filled the room like a declaration: life had persevered, and so had Isabella. Tears mingled with sweat on her face as she held her daughter close, overwhelmed by love, pride, and the knowledge that she had endured so much to reach this point. The birth became more than a medical milestone, it was deeply symbolic. Isabella had survived years of emotional strain, humiliation, and betrayal, and now she held tangible proof of her resilience. In that small, fragile life, she saw the beginning of a future she could shape on her own terms. Her strength, forged in pain and tested in betrayal, stood in stark contrast to Raphael, whose ego was visibly faltering as he observed the reverence and support others offered her. Where he had once wielded power through arrogance and manipulation, he now confronted the stark reality of his failures. Friends, nurses, and hospital staff watched silently, witnessing a woman reclaim her dignity and assert her unyielding spirit. Each glance at Isabella and her newborn reinforced the shift. She was no longer a passive participant in her life but the author of her own story. Raphael, seeing the admiration, care, and respect Isabella commanded in the hospital, began to understand, perhaps for the first time, the consequences of his cruelty. This realization would make her forthcoming words all the more devastating, setting the stage for a confrontation that would forever alter their relationship and leave Raphael powerless before the strength and resolve of the woman he had underestimated. Isabella held her newborn daughter close, feeling the soft weight of life against her chest, and for the first time in months, a profound clarity settled over her. Raphael, still hovering awkwardly at the edge of the room, opened his mouth as if to speak, to apologize, or to reclaim some semblance of control, but Isabella raised a hand, stopping him before a single word escaped. The room fell silent, the hospital staff and friends sensing the tension shift, waiting as though instinctively knowing that what came next would leave a mark far deeper than any physical scar. Her voice, calm and unwavering, cut through the air, measured yet powerful. "I carried your child through fear, humiliation, and betrayal," she said, her gaze locking on Raphael. "I endured your public mockery, your cruelty, and your selfish need for validation. But I am not broken, and neither is the life I have brought into this world. You may have believed that appearances, money, and influence gave you power, but they never defined me. Today, I reclaim what is mine, my dignity, my strength, and my child's future. Nothing you do, no lie or display, can take that from me." The words landed like a hammer, precise and inescapable. Raphael's lips parted, then faltered. No apology, no defense came to mind. The arrogance and control he had wielded for so long evaporated under the force of Isabella's truth. The hospital staff and witnesses felt the shift. A woman who had been humiliated and marginalized now stood unshakable, commanding respect through courage and clarity. In that single, transformative moment, the balance of power irrevocably changed. Isabella was no longer a victim of his cruelty, she had become a force he could not manipulate, charm, or intimidate. Raphael's remorse was palpable, his realization absolute, and the knowledge that he had lost control forever sank into him. Isabella's last words were not just a statement, they were a declaration of independence, justice, and unassailable strength, a turning point that would redefine both their lives. The aftermath of Isabella's bold declaration hit Raphael like a tidal wave. His carefully curated public image, once polished and admired, began to unravel almost immediately. Social media erupted with criticism, screenshots of his past arrogance and cruelty circulating alongside heartfelt messages supporting Isabella. Friends and even family members, previously swayed by his charm and influence, began to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with his behavior. The man who had built his life around appearances and admiration now found himself exposed, vulnerable, and increasingly isolated. Business sponsors and associates, eager to preserve their own reputations, severed ties without hesitation. Luxury brands, tech ventures, and lifestyle partnerships that had once competed for his attention now released statements condemning his actions. Every attempt Raphael made to spin the situation or regain control was met with skepticism and disdain. Meanwhile, his relationship with Selena, which had thrived on secrecy and ego, crumbled under the intense scrutiny and pressure. She blamed him for the fallout, their private bond now impossible to maintain in the glare of public condemnation. Arguments erupted, alliances fractured, and their once intimate connection dissolved into chaos. In contrast, Isabella's dignity and composure shone even brighter. Where Raphael's panic and defensiveness highlighted his failures, Isabella's calm, measured, and resilient demeanor underscored her strength. She began to plan her life with clarity and purpose, consulting legal counsel, securing financial stability, and establishing a safe and nurturing environment for her newborn child. Every decision she made reflected foresight and self-respect, reinforcing that her future would no longer be dictated by Raphael's whims or cruelty. The consequences of Raphael's arrogance were fully realized. His empire of influence and admiration crumbled while Isabella's life, built on courage and resilience, began to flourish. The world witnessed the stark contrast, a man undone by his ego and a woman strengthened by her trials, poised to reclaim her life and the dignity that had been threatened but never truly taken from her. Isabella stepped into her new life with a quiet confidence that had been forged through months of pain, betrayal, and resilience. The days that followed the hospital stay were filled with adjustments, sleepless nights, and the careful balancing act of motherhood, but for the first time, she felt truly in control. Her newborn daughter, a symbol of hope and survival, was the center of her world, and every smile, every tiny movement reminded Isabella of the strength that had carried her through the darkest moments. She embraced her independence fully, creating a home filled with warmth, safety, and love, far removed from the coldness and cruelty she had endured before. Financially, legally, and emotionally, Isabella laid the foundation for a stable life. She established secure arrangements for her daughter's future, ensuring that Raphael could no longer manipulate or intimidate her. Her days were structured not by someone else's whims but by her own choices, each decision reinforcing her sense of autonomy and self-worth. Even the small routines, preparing meals, decorating a nursery, or simply rocking her child to sleep, became acts of reclamation, ways to assert control over a life that had once felt dictated by fear and humiliation. Meanwhile, Raphael watched from the distance, powerless and remorseful. He saw the world celebrate Isabella's strength and dignity, witnessing the life he had tried to control and tarnish flourish without him. His attempts at reparation or influence fell flat, the power he once wielded had shifted irrevocably. Isabella's journey concluded not with bitterness but with empowerment and hope. She had endured public humiliation, emotional betrayal, and physical pain, yet she emerged unbroken. Her struggles became the foundation of her courage, a testament to the resilience of a woman who refused to be defined by cruelty. Her humiliation did not shatter her, instead, it became the cornerstone of a life rebuilt with dignity, strength, and unshakable independence, a life she now embraced fully alongside her daughter.